So back in the late 90s, my wife and I moved to DeKalb, Missouri. We took a small little church in a small little town, and we spent about 5 years there. About 20 months into our ministry, one of our elders began to exhibit strange and erratic behavior. I'm just going to leave it there and not get into the nitty-gritty details. But his wife and daughter actually came by the church and asked if I would be willing to talk to him about getting some professional help for the very clear mental issues that were going on. And I reluctantly agreed. I had the conversation, and let me tell you, it did not go well. And when I say it did not go well, he turned all of his negative energy and anger and everything toward like destroying and discrediting my reputation. And in fact, one afternoon, he came by our house. We lived in the parsonage owned by the church and so on like that. Came by the house, had a little tape recorder, and he recorded the conversation, but he wanted Tara and I to know that while he was in the military many, many years ago, they had trained him how to kill people with his bare hands. Not that he would ever do that to us, but he just wanted us to know that. So within a few days, things had gone from worse to worser, and the elders made the decision that we needed to get out of town. So we loaded up, myself and Tara. Actually, I had to do a funeral before I left town. One of our deacons said there was one eye on the notes and one eye on the door the entire time. I don't know how I did that, but we went out of town. And about a week later, he was picked up on a psych evaluation, put in the hospital, and we came home. I didn't expect some of the fallout, some of the aftermath that happened from that. In fact, let me explain a little bit. I expected people would leave the church because they believed what he said about me, and that is exactly what happened. But I didn't expect the foot traffic in my office in the couple of months after all of this happened. Now, some people came by to encourage. Some people came by to gossip. Well, you know this family in the community and this family in the church, they have those skeletons in their closet as well. What I did not expect, though, is the number of people who would just stop by, and it began with small talk, and then they would say, I need to tell you about the abuse that I've gone through in my life. Or I need to tell you about the addiction that I've battled with my life. Or perhaps the fact that they struggled in their marriage. They struggled with depression. I remember one little old lady, her name was Minnie. Little old lady, she's probably in her 80s. She came by and she said, over 50 years ago, I lost a daughter. And her husband refused to talk about it, so she never got to talk about it. And she carried this weight around for decades by herself, talking with no one. And so it was amazing to me. What was amazing to me is the people who came into the office and stopped by and for lack of a better term, were sharing their soul struggles. They were part of the blue-haired crowd. Now, when I talk about blue-haired crowd, I'm not talking about the punk rockers. Blue-haired crowd is code for old people, right? I mean, these are people that, like, the very next step in their spiritual journey was death. But yet, they were dealing with immense, incredible pain. And so I figured something out, and I've carried this for well over 20 years now. And it's this reality, and I'm going to use our vernacular for our sermon series. Everyone experiences soul struggles. Everyone. Could be a doctor's appointment with test results. Could be a chronic illness that just kind of lingers and has become part of your life. It could be an unexpected death. It could be abuse, loneliness, regret, guilt. It could be what counselors, if you see their notes, says FOO, family of origin issues. It could be maybe a marriage difficulty, insecurity, anxiety, depression. And here's the problem. Satan wants to convince you that you are alone in your soul struggle. That no one will understand, no one will get what you are going through. No one has ever gone through what you are going through. And he wants you, here, I'm going to go ahead and expand this. Satan wants you to sin and suffer in anonymity. To know that nobody's going to understand. So let's just keep this thing under wraps. But the reality is, and the very staunch reality is, everybody goes through soul struggles. And we're going to look very quickly this morning at a soul struggle of a man by the name of David. David in 1 Samuel chapter 30 is going through what we would consider an immense soul struggle. You see, to set this kind of up, we have seasons like it's about ready to be football season, right? Well, in the ancient world, they had war season. The kings would go off to war. And so, it was kind of like a civilized, very uncivilized sort of thing. So they went off to war. And the men of David, as kind of a militia of Israel, are off fighting who Israel is always fighting, Philistines. But while they're off fighting, and they leave, and they kind of leave their hometown a little bit open, it says this: 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and Ziklag, and they crushed Ziklag and burned it to the ground. They carried off the women and children and everyone else, but without killing anyone. So that's kind of the scenario. That's kind of what's going on. But then we read this in verses 3 through 5. When David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. David's two wives, I'm not even going to try to say her name, from Jezreel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal from Carmel, were among those captured. I want to go back to verse 4. They wept until they could weep no more. Have you been there? Have you been in a situation where the tears need to come but just can't? I was on the phone with my son about a month ago. He's a youth pastor in Dodge City. And he's on the phone, and he said, well, I need to call you back. One of my elders were calling. And he called back. He was bawling. One of his students had committed suicide. Got thrown into the fire that day because the other two pastors were out of town. And so he was over with this family all day and making phone calls and different things like that. And he went over to talk to another staff member early in the evening. And I remember Zach saying this. When I got to Monty's house to tell him what had happened, I had no tears left to cry. And maybe you've been there, and maybe you understand those things that we talked about, like that, the soul struggles that come in life. But the big question is, what do you do with your soul struggles? What do you do with them? As, again, everyone is going to experience them, but what do you do with them? Notice verse 6. It's kind of interesting how David's men reacted. David was now in great danger because all his men were very bitter about losing their sons and daughters. And they began to talk about stoning him, but David found strength in the Lord his God. So David's men do what a lot of us do. They blame somebody else for all their problems. Do we ever do that in America? I mean, let's not just say America. As old as sin is the issue of I'm the victim here. It's not my fault. Now, again, there are some times we are to blame. This is one of those situations. They weren't necessarily to blame. Sometimes soul struggles happen and there's no logical explanation. There's no answer. And in fact, I love the story in the book of John when there was the blind man and the religious leader said, so who sinned, him or his parents? And Jesus said, neither. This is all about so that the glory of God can come through him. And separate sermon altogether, maybe we should add this on, but have you ever thought that maybe whatever it is that you are dealing with in life might just be for the glory of God? So that God gets the spotlight. I want you to think about the bigger context of what's happening in David's life. He's a target of foreign enemies. His family's been taken hostage. His home is destroyed. We're going to zoom out a little bit more. Saul wants him dead because David's more popular than him. And even his family thought he was the runt of the litter. If there was anybody who could just sit there and cry, it was probably David, but he found his strength in the Lord his God. In fact, notice what happens next. Then he said to Abiathar the priest, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought it. Then David asked the Lord, should I chase after this band of raiders? Will I catch them? And the Lord said, yes, go after them. You will surely recover everything that was taken from you. And that is exactly what has happened. But notice what David does. He says, bring me the ephod. And you're probably going, huh? Have you ever heard of an ephod before? So an ephod was actually a priestly garment the priest would put on in worship scenarios, but an ephod, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but an ephod is what one would wear when they would seek direction and guidance from God. Now that sounds a little bit odd to us, but this is Old Testament, and there's a lot of odd stuff in there to us, right? But he says, like, bring me the garment, bring me the thing so that I can inquire of God. And I think here is the important detail. This is our bottom line, probably Brandon Shaffer's shortest sermon ever. In facing soul struggles, David sought direction from God right out of the gate. And I want to put in there right out of the gate because that's so vitally important and convicting to me. He didn't talk to friends. He didn't Google it. He didn't self-medicate. He didn't turn to vices. He didn't have a meeting. He sought direction from God. When you experience soul struggles, what's your first instinct? Here's the thing I need to do right now, action in your life? Because for me, that's not always where I go. I might eventually get to prayer, right? I might eventually get to bring me the ephod so I can seek direction from God. But most generally, I want to talk it through. Most generally, I want to formulate my plan. Most generally, what I want to do is I want to do it on my own and bring God in if needed. Anybody with me? David, right out of the gate, said, bring me the ephod. So the question is, where do we go from here? I want to offer 3 items. We talked about head, heart, and hands here today. The very first item that I'm going to bring out is this: pray, hallowed be your name sort of prayers. And you're thinking, what in the world are hallowed be your name sort of prayers? So Jesus, when he was teaching us to pray, he said, pray like this, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. We're going King James. Okay? God in heaven, your name is holy. Your name is good. You are awesome. You deserve majesty. You deserve glory. You see, the point of hallowed be your name is to declare the goodness of God. To declare that God is higher than, bigger than, smarter than, holier than anything else. And here's the point with this. If you do not acknowledge the goodness of God in the normal times, it is going to be really hard to cling to the goodness of God when soul struggles come. So pray, hallowed be your name, sort of prayers. Also, hide God's word in your heart. Psalm 119. Does anybody remember saying the pledges in Sunday school when you were a kid? You had the pledge to the flag, pledge to the Christian flag, and pledge to the Bible. I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against thee. People who are a whole lot smarter than me, and there are a lot of them, have suggested that the number one indicator of spiritual growth and maturity is spending time in God's Word. And so when soul struggles come, you will have a firm foundation. And finally this, lean in when soul struggles come. Lean in. I think a lot of times our prayer is, God, remove this. Paul prayed that, thorn in the side. He asked for it to be taken away. I want to read a quote from C.S. Lewis in The Problem of Pain. He says, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is the megaphone to rouse a deaf world. No doubt, pain as God's megaphone is a terrible instrument. It may lead to final and unrepentant rebellion, but it gives the only opportunity the bad man can have for amendment. It removes the veil. It plants the flag of truth within the fortress of the rebel soul. So I want to speak out of my own life for a second. Back in probably 2007, probably before, things in my wife's health were not spectacular. But in the end of 2007 and the beginning of 2008, they took a turn. In fact, she was so anemic, they were talking infusions. We kept going to the infusion center. Things were not working. And so eventually they said, let's do a hysterectomy and everything is going to be fantastic. And it was as if that surgery flipped a switch, but not in a good way. So over the last 15 years, we have at best managed health. There's been great times, there's been good times. I would not always say that there are optimal times, but I'm just going to share something with you that I would not have said 15 years ago. I don't think that I would be the husband that I am today, and please understand, I still got a long way to go. I don't think our marriage would be where it is today and the place of health that it is had we not had to walk through this journey. I don't wish it on anybody, but I'm actually at a point where I can thank God for this journey because of the sanctification that He has done in and through this. So rather than fight it, lean in. Lean into what God can and will do. Will you join me in prayer?